look, let's tell it what it is. They're in Kansas City, and Jamal Agnew drops that ball inside the 5. They go in there, they're down, 4? Get a stop, score, you win.
Right.
So I don't think they're as far as people think.
Welcome into 1010XL's pre-draft roundtable. Now, this time last year, we were making the case for number 1. Boy, how things have changed. And while I'm still excited to once again be joined by the embedded and shredded Hayes Carlyon, the one, the only Matt Hayes, you can check out his stuff at Saturday Down South. We're no longer talking number 1 overall draft pick, boys. We're no longer talking top 10 draft pick. We're talking the case for number 24, and there's a lot of different variables that could go into if the Jags even pick at number 24 overall. But let's start big picture here. When you look at the Jaguars, Hayes, and their needs and their holes following a 4th place finish, if you may, in the AFC standings this past season, what is the biggest glaring need that they need to address in this draft?
Yeah, I think it comes down to 3 areas. But for me, what concerns me the most about this roster build is all the rookie contracts are centered on the defensive side of the ball. You've got Trayvon Walker, Devin Lloyd, Chad Muma, Cisco, Campbell. On the offensive side, you really don't have that. You've got Trevor, you've got Etienne, you've got Fortner. So I think you've got to start thinking about that if you're Trent Baalke with your premium draft capital. You lose Jawan Taylor by a mile, the biggest loss this offseason that this team had, signs a huge deal with the Chiefs. I think you have to look at replacing the offensive line that you've lost in terms of the talent that Taylor had. So I think if the right guy is there at 24, and that's the key, is the Jaguars aren't in control of the draft like they have been. You've got to have 23 picks come off the board. There's a million different scenarios that could take place, but if the right tackle is there, I think it makes all the sense in the world for the Jaguars.
Pun intended on right tackle. But Matt Hayes, I know you believe this defense is far from a finished product.
Well, first off, I don't like how you think cap-wise. Mm-hmm. I don't want a capologist in my head on draft day. Mm-hmm. You know, I respect it.
Yeah.
Because I love you.
Right.
But I don't want a capologist in my head on draft day.
Mm-hmm.
I want, who do we need? Who can help us immediately? And I'm not sure that the need is tackle. I understand what you're saying, and I agree with that. I look at corner, it's get the quarterback, carve in the back end, and they play off each other. And the idea is, because this staff is such a good teaching staff, right? We've all agreed with that, the way they developed last year, that maybe year 2 becomes a difference maker for Trayvon Walker. Maybe year 2 becomes a difference maker for Devin Lloyd, not only covering, but also in rush situations. Same with Chad Muma. So maybe they start to develop a little bit as players, more than a little bit, a lot. The big year 1, year 2 jump we always talk about. So then I'm looking at corner, and you got to have 3 good corners, right, to play in this league. You have to. You got to have 2 on the outside, 1 in the slot. You're probably going to lose Darius Williams. See, I'm looking forward, like you capologist right now. You're probably going to lose
Welcome
Darius Williams.
to the team.
Right, in 2024. So why not get somebody in a deep draft for corners? I'd love him to get like a long guy like Joey Porter Jr. I keep saying Jerry. Joey Porter Jr. Just a 6'2", 200-pound long guy that can run, that's physical. Get him in there, stick him in the slot, let him go shut down the guy that everybody knows they have to shut down at some point, okay? The road goes through Kansas City. And if you're not shutting down that passing attack with the best tight end in the NFL, you have problems. So, that's where I go.
But with that said, Matt, you just alluded to it. It's a pretty deep corner class. And so that's why, while I was with you for the longest time, I said corner, that 3rd corner spot is the most glaring need. As much as you re-signed Trey Herndon, it's been very evident that, sure, he can play in the slot, but he is not your slot of the future. And when Doug Peterson talked last offseason about the fact that they released Malcolm Brown, they cut Jay Tufele, they went in favor of having more guys in the secondary, that appears to be where they value premium capital, because that is where the future of the NFL is headed. With that said, like you alluded to, it is a deeper draft class at the corner position. And so that's why I've come around to, yes, as scary as it sounds, For the 5th time in 6 seasons, I do believe the Jaguars should go edge rusher in this year's NFL draft. And listen, I mean, they've been throwing darts for 6-7 years, if not 20 to 21 years when it comes to this position. But the fact of the matter is that while it certainly is a passing league, because it is a passing league, you got to get to the quarterback too. Certainly covering on the back end is important. Stopping Travis Kelce is important. And while the Jags can bank as much as they want to on the Philadelphia Eagles had similar sack numbers as a team in 2021, like the Jaguars had just 35 sacks this past year, and the Eagles doubled that in the subsequent season with 70 sacks to lead the National Football League, almost break the Bears' all-time record. You can't guarantee that that is going to happen, especially knowing you did lose, even if they're rotational pieces, Arden Key and DeJuan Smoot. That's over 400 snaps you have to replace. And while I do think the Jaguars will tap back into the defensive pool, both in free agency and later on in the draft, in terms of finding another defensive tackle, another pass rusher, it's not as deep at the top this year. And if you don't get the Myles Murphy, hell, if you don't get the Nolan Smith, I agree. I don't think he is the best scheme fit. But he's a high character guy. He's from Georgia. If you don't get one of those guys now, you can't guarantee you're going to get a plug and play later in the draft like you can the corner position.
Yeah, the edge rush is really interesting because of what you talked about. You can make a case it's the biggest glaring need on a very good roster. The best roster the Jaguars will have in Trevor Lawrence's career. Because once his second contract kicks in, which it should next year if they do the right thing, you're just not going to be able to have 23 really solid players on your roster like they have now. But the rotational defensive edge piece is important. DeJuan Smoot and Arden Key not only gave them over 400 defensive snaps apiece, they're good quality snaps. I mean, those are productive players. It's not like that was, hey, go in there and just allow us to rest Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker. Arden Key made several big-time plays. Smoot's made several big-time plays.
They both could go inside and outside.
Absolutely. So it is absolutely. I think it's arguably the biggest immediate hole. The problem is, like I keep coming back to, at some point you need to start fortifying your offensive talent. And if they invest another first-round pick on the defensive side of the ball, ultimately, they're not going to be able to continue to field an offense that is littered with free agents. When Trevor's second contract kicks in, you're going to need guys on that side of the ball on cheap rookie deals. But I mean, if the right edge rusher is there, if Nolan Smith is there, which you see in a couple mocks, but he must have the biggest range of any prospect because you'll see him going like 8 to Atlanta. And then you'll see, like, the Chiefs take him in at 31. I mean, he is all over the map.
I mean, Keon White, another edge rusher who could go anywhere between the first and third round, would be the other one. I mean, and that's the problem is so many of these prospects are so polarizing. And so to Matt's point about Joey Porter Jr., I agree. If he's there, you go get him. And I want to dive into a little bit about where he offers that flexibility to be the slot corner and then also eventually move out to the boundary. But the same can be said for one of these premium edge rushers like a Myles Murphy or heck, I mean, I'd love to get Matt's take on Brian Brisset, his Clemson running mate, a guy who obviously naturally is in the interior, Matt, but he can get after the passer. And so you need someone with that flexibility. I'm not sure if a 4th or a 5th round pass rusher is going to afford you that.
So the way I look at it is this, and I agree with Carlyon. I think the more you're starting, the capology is now starting to rub off of me, by the way.
You're always welcome.
There's like 8 or 9 guys right now in free agency that could probably give you what Arden Key gave you last year. I don't know if they can give you what Arden Key and Smoot gave you, but they could probably give you what Arden Key gave you. All right, so you pick up Floyd, okay, who's had 11, 9.5, and 9 sacks the last 3 years. You pay him $8 million, $9 million, 1-year deal. That's it, okay? That at least gives you something on the edge while you're hoping that Trayvon Walker goes from 2.5 to 10 to 9 or 10. Then you've made up the difference between Smoot. So I think that's the idea.
They're even hoping, sorry to interrupt you, I mean, they're even hoping Jordan Smith, who missed all of last year with an injury, he was a 5th round draft pick that they traded up for. Like, they're hoping, or 4th round draft pick, right? I think it was a 4th rounder.
Well, I mean,
they're even hoping he develops because then you at least fill that Smoot role.
I would hope that Josh Allen, who is on a money year right now, also has more than 7.5 sacks. I would hope that Josh Allen hits double-digit sacks. So I think it's, with the defense right now, you're in a hope situation. And I know hope is not a plan, but the hope is these guys develop. And then you add a one-term guy, just like Arden Key was, a 1-year, one-shot guy, like Floyd, and you move on from there. And I agree with you on the offense that you got to get more contracts on that offense. So if a guy like O'Cyrus Torrence is still there at 24, that's a major upgrade at left guard, right?
Yeah, I mean,
if Darnell Wright is there at 24 still for some reason, do you take him knowing that he may not be a starter, that he may have to wait a year before he starts for you?
I would take Wright because I think Wright would start, and then I think Walker Little either plays left guard or is the swing tackle. Chances are Cam Robinson isn't going to make it through a 17-game schedule anyway, and I think it's his last year here. So I think you've got to start getting ready for a post-Cam Robinson roster. So I would rather Wright be there, but my fear is that what we're talking about is there is a high probability that the worst case scenario is going to happen for them in terms of their biggest needs. That edge rush is gone, that your top 4 or 5 guys are gone there, that the top 4 tackles are gone, and at that point, now somebody else might fall. You may end up with a corner that you are thrilled by. I mean, the beauty of that is somebody is going to fall. Maybe you get the first pick at the tight end crop if that's where they elect to go. I wouldn't do that, but again, there's going to be some give and take. But I think it's got to be ideally an offensive tackle, a corner, an edge rusher. But to Torrence, if the board was evaporated,
right,
and Torrence was there for you at 24, then yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense because now he's your left guard. And I don't know if maybe he can play right tackle in the future. But I would draft him saying this is my left guard for the next 8 to 10 years.
Okay, so quick, let me throw out this scenario for you. Okay, you know that Cam is not going to be here in 2024, and I know Mia said this, you have said this, that Trent Baalke loves Cam Robinson. If they get into a situation in camp where Cam's still a little iffy with the injury, okay, he said injuries now on both knees, right?
Yes.
He's still a little injury. You got Walker Little, who played really well last year down the stretch. Let's just say Walker Little beats him out. Are you okay with sitting $20 million on your bench?
$22 million.
$22 million?
Highest paid player on the team.
Yeah, I don't think they'll do that. If he can walk, he'll start. So unless he is
because of the money?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And again, Cam Robinson, if he is able to play, I'm not trying to say he's a bad player. I think he's an above average player. I wouldn't have re-signed him, but but I do think there's a very high likelihood this is his last year here because they've shown their cards on that.
Right.
I mean, they haven't restructured them. They've restructured everybody. They restructured the guy that sells peanuts, but they haven't restructured the guy that has a gigantic number.
The biggest deal.
And the reason that they haven't done that is because they want to be able to release him and get as much savings as possible and not tack on void years and push money for Cam Robinson out like they've done with 6 or 7 other guys on this roster. So they've already kind of told you that they're worried this is his last year here. But to that point, if he is healthy, he is going to start at left tackle for the Jaguars.
So let's talk names. You brought up Darnell Wright. Obviously, we've talked about the possibility of O'Cyrus Torrence there. Other tackles that you would be okay with in the first round, or, and this is my prevailing thought right now, if the Jaguars are to go edge rusher in the first round, perhaps, just like we saw with Cam Robinson and just like we saw with Jawan Taylor, the Jaguars move up in the second for whichever tackle falls into the second round. So who are some names you're looking at, Hayes?
I think at edge, you'd love for Nolan Smith to be there. I think it's probably not going to happen, but to me, that would be the best case scenario. Nolan Smith's there at 24. You do cartwheels, you now, does
that put them into a 4-3? But my question, and Matt and I have talked about this, does that make the Jaguars a 3-4, 4-3? What happens with Nolan Smith in particular?
Yeah, I think he'd be an outside linebacker. And then, again, I think his rookie year, you're probably looking at, ideally 40% of the defensive snaps if Trayvon and Josh Allen are healthy, something like that. So I just don't think he'll be there, but I would think Nolan Smith, best case scenario at edge. Maybe Murphy is there, but with his traits, it doesn't feel like he's probably going to make it to 24, but there is a chance. And then I think, Wright makes a ton of sense for the Jaguars at 24 if he's there. Again, I think it's low. The probability is low because the problem that we're going to run into here is that it's a terrible draft. And when it's a terrible draft, what's going to happen is these general managers are going to lean towards taking big people. And that's what's going to be a problem for the Jaguars, I think, at 24, is that the edge, the tackle class is going to be fairly decimated when you look at it when they're at 24. Now, the good news is edge and corner are pretty deep. Tackle, not maybe as much, but so, I mean, those would be names if they were there. I think that's great. At corner, certainly, Porter, Forbes out of Mississippi State, I think would be a guy that probably will be there. 14 career interceptions, 6 pick sixes. Sign me up at nickel for Forbes. And so.
Do you think they could get him in the second round, though, Matt?
Oh yeah, I think he actually falls because he doesn't run that well. So I think he falls to the second round.
And he also is like 160 pounds soaking wet.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
There's other guys. I mean, like I love Darius Rush, the other corner at South Carolina, who is a former receiver. He's only played corner for a year and a half. He's the fastest corner at the combine. He's 6'1.5", 6'2", 200 pounds. He's a big, long dude. That's a guy that you stick right in there and say, go get Kelsey. You need a long, tall, thick dude that can do that.
But
I even think he's an option in second or third round.
Right. That's my thing. You can get him in the second or third round. If you go corner in the first round, though, Joey Porter Jr., who else is I have to do this because I need this guy. And moreover, he can play slot for me now and then nickel down the line. Or are you going to try to stick Darius Williams in his $12 million contract at the nickel position?
I don't. I'm hearing a lot about Brian Branch. Yeah. And again, Brian Branch to me falls in line with Anthony Richardson. Physically, he's what you want, although he did run like a 4.5 at the combine, which is not good. Physically, he's what you want. He comes from a great program. I mean, I watched him get beat deep. He's not a cover guy. Alabama got better in coverage in this last season when Eli Ricks finally figured it out, got on the field in like week 8 or 9, and all of a sudden they covered better. He's not a cover guy. He's a safety. So if you want him as a safety, great, pick him at 24. But he's not a slot guy. He's not a cover guy.
The other thing, too, is it's always dangerous to take Alabama defensive backs because Nick Saban is going to maximize them. He is the greatest defensive backs coach walking the planet. And so there's not going to be a lot of upside when the Alabama defensive back gets to you.
They're there. Right.
They're ready. They're tapped out. That's what they're going to be. It's why traditionally they disappoint, because there isn't a lot of room for growth because of how well they've been developed at Alabama. So it is something to think about with Branch.
Looking at you, Ronnie Harrison.
Yeah,
looking at you.
Oh, there's tons of them.
How many guys have actually developed? Minka definitely. But other than Minka, who developed? If you really think about it.
I mean, you look at the percentages. I mean, it's not high. And I would say it's lower. The percentage is lower than what the first round percentage is anyway, which isn't overly high.
Right.
And again, I'm not saying it's a compliment to Saban, but it's something you do have to, I think, worry about in selecting Alabama defensive backs. Is there's probably not going to be a lot of room for improvement there. Whereas obviously there's a lot of players in this draft that, I mean, you'd like to think 90% of the players in this draft have their best football ahead of them because they're just not going to get the coaching at the collegiate level that they're going to get at the NFL level. Alabama in the secondary, that's an exception.
So before we wrap, because I do want to also address the possibility of the Jaguars trading up or trading down, but as we talk about Alabama pedigree, especially at the corner position, one thing that's been brought to my attention is maybe Trent Baalke's affinity for the Crimson Tide has shifted with Kirby Smart's move to Athens. Tyson Campbell, a lot of people questioned that pick at 33 overall back in 2021. Obviously, it seems to be paying off right now if he continues to develop. A couple names that have been floated, of course, include Kelee Ringo, who was the successor to Campbell up in Athens, but even Tyreek Stevenson, who played with Campbell up in Georgia and then transferred back home to Miami. He's a name that visited the Jags. He's a longer sort of guy, bulky built, if you may. And I think he's a guy, Matt, that maybe he's there in the second round. And in the same vein as we're talking about these Georgia corners, who's to say Trent Baalke also really liked Trayvon Walker and what Will Muschamp and the crew was able to do with him. Maybe that's why they make Nolan Smith a priority. Maybe they try to move up for him. I don't think that's wise personally, and we'll get into that in a second. But has his affinity maybe shifted to those Georgia guys, perhaps?
I don't know why it wouldn't. Look at the way they're playing every year. I mean, Kelee Ringo played really well 2 years ago. Last year, he kind of regressed a little bit. But, I mean, you're talking about a legit 6'3" guy, 6'3", 205, and a guy that runs on the 4.3s. If you believe in your ability to develop players and you think he hasn't hit his ceiling, which it doesn't look like he has, imagine having Tyson Campbell on one end and Keely Ringo on the other. You've got two big, tall, long corners at that point. Who in the NFL doesn't want that?
Yeah. But he's playing outside. And that's where then the question becomes, if you're the Jags, this big picture here, are you drafting, when you say we need this third corner, are you saying I need a guy who can play the nickel now and then the boundary later? Do you prioritize that over those measurables?
No, I go with the best players, what I do. I don't draft for position, I draft for best player. So if that means he's got to play inside for a year, or if you got to say Darius Williams, look, you got to go figure it out, man. I know you didn't figure it out last year, but you got to go figure out the slot.
Yeah, we're paying you a lot of money to figure it out. Yeah, right. I mean, and again, Darius Williams is another guy. This is obviously his last year here. He's making $12 million. There's no chance they continue that. My guess is he's going to say, okay, well, release me, and I'll go try and get it somewhere else. So, I think Ringo is intriguing. It's one of these that, to me, if you were going to throw out the wild card of give me a guy that no one's really talked about that could be the pick at 24, I think it makes a lot of sense for what you guys are talking about. I mean, a good scouting outfit should start everything in Athens, Georgia, and then work their way to Tuscaloosa and Columbus, and but Athens is the capital right now of Draft City because of how well Kirby Smart's recruited, the athletes that he's been able to acquire. In terms of the speed and the frame, I mean, it is an NFL factory, and so I'd have absolutely no problem at all. I mean, if they wanted to take a Georgia guy in every other round, I'd have absolutely no problem with it.
So real quick before we go, the possibility of the Jaguars trading up, trading down. It's obviously something we didn't get to talk about much last year or the year before. I guess you could have with Travis Etienne, but that's besides the point. I think if I could make one bold prediction, whether they are able to move back or not, I firmly believe the Jaguars will try to move back in this draft because I think they recognize, just like we have here today, there are multiple holes on this roster, even if they aren't glaring like they were the past two seasons. And so I think they want to acquire more second, third round picks, plug and play guys, even if they're not that elite tier. And so my question for you guys is, where do you move back? Who are maybe some second and third round guys you say, hey, let's look for them?
I think it's all going to be keyed around Hendon Hooker and where he ends up going in this draft. If he is available at 24, you might get some calls at that point. It's not the ideal place to be because a lot of times when teams want to come in to get a quarterback, they're thinking more between like 28 and in most cases 32. In this draft, it's 31. But so would a team jump from second round to 24 to get Hendon Hooker, which is probably, I know the Jaguars traded up last year and it ended up being a linebacker, but for the most part, that's usually a quarterback move. I think if they could get, somewhere between, I wouldn't go probably any further back than 40. But I think the compensation that they're going to be looking to acquire is a second round pick in next year's draft, because that's the pick they're probably going to lose on Calvin Ridley, the good pick. That's the pick that if they sign Ridley to an extension, which I think they're probably going to, then it would be nice to either recoup that second rounder or pick up a third rounder. So at least you'd have 2/3 in that draft to kind of make up for it. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're able to do it. I don't think they're going to get a lot of calls, but if they do, I think it's going to be not so much what can you give us in this draft, but can you give us your second rounder in 24?
That's an interesting thought. I mean, looked at it like that, and you're probably dead on that, actually.
The capologist, he's always thinking.
Yeah, I just don't know that I trade back. I mean, I know you guys. I look at this. I don't see a lot of holes in this team. I see a hole at slot corner. All right. I see a hole at rush, at edge. Okay. You got to get the quarterback. Those are the two holes I see. Everywhere else, I think they're all right. I mean, look. Let's tell it what it is. They're in Kansas City, and Jamal Agnew drops that ball inside the 5. They go in there. They're down what, 4? Get a stop, score, you win.
Right.
So I don't think they're as far as people think. You certainly need more help off the edge. You certainly need the slot corner. I think if you can get a slot corner that is a guy that you know that right away you can stick in, boom, and he's playing, and you can move him outside in 2024, take him. Take him.
No need to worry about moving up.
No,
moving down.
especially if you've got him. If he's value on your board at 17, and the next pick you get, you're going to get a value on your board of somewhere around late 40s or early 50s. That's a big difference. That 30, 35 spot is a big difference.
Well, gentlemen, thanks as always for stopping by. This 1010XL pre-draft roundtable brought to you by the good folks at Safe Harbor Seafood and Big Brothers Big Sisters. Looking forward to draft night here in Duval County on Thursday, April 27th.